Construction work on my paddle steamer engine continues, albeit incredibly slowly. This is part 5. I have the greatest respect for the old time fitters, 1800s, 1900s, something like that, before CNC anyway, which is a bit like I work, because you do the best you can, you machine everything up, only to discover ultimately if you've got anything complicated it doesn't quite fit, and so you have to spend hours literally tweaking and fettling to get things to fit fairly readily. And that is certainly the case, in my case, with the studs and the steam chests and the steam chest covers and the cylinders. In theory it would all go together like Meccano, and even at this time, although they're isn't quite right, I'm not quite happy. The amount of time it takes to just tweak and enlarge or file or whatever is amazing. So I've moved my stop arrangement on the lathe to the left hand side as you look at the headstock, which now means I can actually see what's going on as the stop approaches the end of its travel, rather than having to look over the tailstock that I've been doing for the last 20 years. Don't know why I never did this before really. It's very gash. I could lie and say one day I'll make a better job of it, but I know full well I won't. If it works, that's good enough. And what prompted this flurry of activity on this cross-slide stop on the lathe? Well, I had to make 2 wrist pins, I think they're called, for the crosshead on the paddle steamer engine, or the crossheads on the paddle steamer engine I'm making. And they do need to be reasonably accurate to length. I mean, it's not fractions of a thou, but it does need to be something like. And I just got fed up suddenly. I thought, why am I peering over the back of the tailstock all the time to see where the stop position is? And that's it. Another example of where this cross-slide stop rather is fairly handy. Turning the boss on the end of this piece of steel here, which is part of the crosshead arrangement on the paddle steamer, and just turning the boss on the end and stopping the turning operation in the same place every time, without worrying about dials and stuff like that. For sure, these crossheads and slide bars don't look very much, but my goodness, it's been a considerable amount of work. Today is January the 7th, I think, 2023, I think. Progress on this paddle steamer engine is painful, to say the least, i.e. unbelievably slow. At the moment, I'm trying to sort out the cross slide, the slide bars and the slide bar bracket on the left hand cylinder. Now the slide bar bracket is bolted through the frame of the engine. The slide bar bracket is tapped 4BA. I'm going by the drawings at the moment, and bolts through and holds the bracket in place. The whole thing, I won't go into it in detail, but the whole thing is a monumental faff to set up and get it all in the right place. But, and I have no idea, they're not shown on the drawing, these frames have a gigantic boss at this point, which is really in the way of where the bottom bolt for the slide bar bracket has to pass through the frame. There's nothing on the drawing about it. I can think of no reason for this boss to exist whatsoever. Both frames are the same, so it's a flipping nuisance. And I think what I'm going to have to do is, certainly to start with on the left hand frame, take this lot apart, put this frame back in the milling machine and machine this boss off so I can actually put the 4BA bolt through. What a nuisance. Right, just going to machine off this boss on the side plate of this paddle steamer engine. This boss seems to have no function whatsoever. Just caught in the vice and with a couple of blocks under it just to support it. And we'll see how we get on. Fingers crossed. I have finally got both cylinders sort of 90% erected. Everything's sort of lined up, and I can't do it one-handed really, but the crossheads move satisfactorily. The left there one's a bit stiffer, but it does move. It's kind of odd really when you're doing this kind of thing. The old time fitters really earned their money, and I suppose this is a bit old time engineering, because you do it and you machine and it all seems fine, then you erect it and actually it isn't. Things start to bind a bit, and in my case I have to take things apart so many times while I'm fiddling about, and it's kind of odd really. It was all free and you take it apart, you put it back together, and then suddenly you've got binding in the motion or whatever. It's incredible really. The next stop on this, next job on this paddle steamer engine is to make the eccentric sheaves, and there are 5 eccentrics, 4 for the valve gear and 1 for the pump. Now, strictly speaking, by the drawing, I think the sheave for the pump is supposed to be slightly larger to give a slightly longer pump round travel, I suppose, but I'm a bit lazy, and I've turned up all the eccentrics to the same diameter, so when I get a set up for these sheaves, and that's for the pump, I'm actually going to bore them all exactly the same, which will make the setup a bit easier, and then fit them on the crank. As best I can judge, the diameter of these eccentrics where the eccentric sheaves are going to run is 1.049 inches. Technically they're supposed to be an inch, but they're obviously slightly oversized, 1049. So what I've done, this is a piece of scrap something or other, and there's an example of why you never throw anything away, because you never know. Brass or something, so a bit of plumbing fitting again, and I've turned this OD down here to exactly 1049. So the plan is that when I sort these eccentric sheaves out, they will just slip on here, and therefore theoretically will fit around the eccentrics. That is the plan. All standard stuff really with these eccentric sheaves. The trick is, well, it's not a trick really. Don't forget to drill the two holes so the bolts ultimately will pin the two parts together after you finish boring the middle. And I've drilled for an oil hole here, which in theory, if I got it right, when I finally bore this bit out, magically the oil hole will appear in the bearing, as it were. And the next step will be to separate the two halves. This is a really old design, a really old drawing by Edgar Westbury, and the drawing calls for 6BA bolts tapped into the lower part of the strap. Well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use at least maximum 7BA bolts, because I don't think 6BA is going to leave enough room. So 7BA bolts, and I'm also disinclined to tap into this end, because from what little I know, I don't think that's how it was done in prototype practice. You had a bolt through, and typically you would have two nuts at the other end, one thin, one thick, to sort of locking that arrangement, which I would say gave a much easier degree of adjustment on the bearing. So I think I'll probably go with that approach. Anyway, we'll see. My homemade slitting saw arbor doesn't run very true. One day when I'm bored I might try and do something about that, but not today. And there we are, one done, 4 more to go, including the pump strap. The first eccentric is now split with a couple of temporary 7BA nut and bolts holding the two parts together. Looks okay. So I guess I'll proceed to do the rest. You can't see it on the video, but to help me, it doesn't have to be precise to get the initial alignment, I've actually scratched out some marks on this backing plate, because in theory all these rough eccentric sheaves are the same dimension, give or take, So to help you just align them, having got one done, I'll scratch some marks on it and then I just put the rest of them over the marks. Fingers crossed. Well, somewhat miraculously, machining these 4 eccentric sheaves has taken no time at all with this setup. And, best of all, by some magic, you probably can't see it, but the oil holes have appeared in the right place in each of them as well. Can't be unlucky all the time. I think the next thing I'll make is the 2 connecting rods. And lo and behold, in my box of miscellaneous metal I found 2 bolts. So I think those connecting rods can be made out of these. So how we go on. So what we're doing here is machining what will be the side faces, I don't know whether you call them flanges or what, to the connecting rods prior to any taper turning going on. I do not know what sort of steel these former bolts were made of, but I suspect it's some kind of specialised high tensile stuff. I'm machining it, and I'm not sure whether the phrase is a litany or a plethora, but anyway, it has caused multiple broken drills, chipped carbide, and I know not what. But give up is not in my vocabulary, and we now have the bones of these connecting rods, and the final stage will be to ultimately get them to correct length, but also to turn the tapers. But frankly, I don't think I can stand any more pain for today, so that's going to have to wait till tomorrow. Work on the connecting rods continues. This part at the end is just a chucking piece. Ultimately that gets cut off. The kind of flanged ends, or the foot or whatever it is near enough done. And the next step is to cut the required taper, about 1/16 of an inch in total, 3/8 to 5/16 along the lengths to create the tapered effect. To cut the tapers on these con rods, which don't need to be particularly precise, I mean they're not going to mate with anything, so it's cosmetic really. I'm using my homemade tailstock set over device so that I don't actually have to move the tailstock, which is a bit of a pain, and I'm just doing it by eye. I've set this part over a fraction. The driving dog is on the chucking piece of the con rod, so that's not going to hurt anything, and we'll just run along carefully and see what happens really. When I get this set up refined on this rod, I'll just leave it as it is to do the other rod, so come what may they will both look the same, I hope. maybe he won't come out, don't know. But the good news is the taper is at least heading in the right direction, which is to say the small end is by the this pin. Last cut on this taper, fingers crossed. I don't use it very much, but this sort of set over tailstock arrangement I made thousands of years ago is really useful for a job like this. Not that I do this very much, candidly, cut tapers, but anyway. Not perfect, but this is the first conrod almost done. Just got to open out at the moment. That's a 64th undersize, so just got to ream the small end out to 1/4 inch, and we are then there or thereabouts. Right, the two conrods are done. Can't say they're totally identical, but the dimensions are fine, centre to centre. So the next job is to make the big end brasses that go here. Work, 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 work. I've now spent a considerable amount of time, quite a few hours, checking and aligning to make sure that the centre lines of the connecting rods are in line. Really I suppose they're the big end cranks, aren't they? But I'm now happy with that. Got it sorted out. It involved a lot of fine tuning, but anyway. So I can now make a start on making what I suppose will be called the big end brasses that attach to the connecting rods and, as it were, encircle the big end on the crank. That's the next job, I guess. Now there's nothing in this paddle steamer kit to indicate what the various parts are. A lot of it is dead obvious, things like cylinders and brackets and stuff like that is blooming obvious. But I've been pondering what on earth this block of bronze or brass or whatever it is for. And I was about to just consign it to my, not scrap bin, but box of miscellaneous things I didn't know what they were. And then I woke up in the middle of the night, about 2:30 in the morning, and suddenly thought, I know what that is. That's the bit from which you make the big end brasses. And I think I'm right, so that's what I'm going to do. mystery solved. I don't have any 6BA bolts long enough. They need to be an inch under the head to go through the big ends and whatnot on these connecting rods. And for reasons unknown, I've got quite a bit of 3/16 square stock. So I decided to make 4 1-inch long square headed 6BA bolts, which I'll use on these connecting rods. Hasn't taken very long, but it's just one more job pushed off the list. Well, I'm not happy. This has been 2 days work to get this to turn like this, and I'm still not happy with it, but anyway. It is at least turning, which at one stage it catastrophically was not. Anyway, for now I think I'll give up on the right hand side and I'll have a go at the left hand side. My goodness. Finally I'm making progress. There is a knock somewhere, something's just touching that shouldn't be, and I'll have to find that I guess, but we have at least got everything turning around finally. And will it go backwards? Who knows? It will. Seriously, the knock's vanished. Oh, it's possibly something to do with the pump ram. Banging on that, I say, maybe. Because that's obviously not fixed yet. Fairly confident it's that ram. Still got a number of adjustments to make, but right, getting there.